All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our monthly CISMA call. We're going to go ahead and jump right in. I've got 1:30 on my official iPhone time. We've got about 25 people on the call, and we usually have another 5 or so join in the first 5 minutes of the call. So as you know, the Florida Invasive Species Partnership is a partnership of public and private agencies across the state that facilitate partnerships to prevent and control the threat of invasive species on public and private lands. We also help to coordinate Florida's 16 cooperative invasive species management areas, which are a more regional and local alliance of stakeholders addressing invasive species regionally across the state. So on our agenda today, we have representatives from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission with us to go over their Florida Conservation Blueprint and then introduce the Conservation Actions Tracker tool, which is available to everyone to utilize to help provide information to the overall conservation blueprint. So with that, we are going to jump right into today's presentation and with Sarah Sharkey with FWC. And Sarah, you should just have to click on the screen and should be good to go.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Thank you all for allowing me to be here today. I'm the User Support Specialist for the Florida Conservation Planning Atlas, and I'm excited to be here to share our project and tools with you today. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so today I plan to share with you the Florida Conservation Blueprint and the Conservation Actions Tracker tool. Also, it looks like, based on the agenda we just saw, that we'll have time for questions at the end, so please hold them until then. And let's go ahead and dive right in. So first, we're going to discuss the Florida Conservation Blueprint. The goal of the blueprint is to provide a shared vision that enhances collaborative conservation planning and investment around the state. The hope is that the blueprint will be used to identify and prioritize opportunities to cooperatively envision a conservation landscape of the future, along with setting conservation targets, selecting surrogate species, and developing monitoring protocols. We want this tool to facilitate partner collaborations that can help to maximize conservation investments and effectiveness around the state, because we all know that we can accomplish a lot more by working together rather than separately. Although the blueprint is not meant to replace any local knowledge, we're hoping that it will provide support for partners making conservation investment decisions around the state. As the project develops, we're working to promote data integration and sharing landscape-level data sets around the state. The blueprint builds on CLIP, which is a project entitled Critical Lands and Waters Identification Projects. The blueprint ties in social and economic priorities to create more realistic maps of priorities that incorporates rather than ignores the human element. The team that we've built is working to build a consensus GIS overlay that will allow for data to be nicely visualized for stakeholders such as yourself. Overall, the goal is to create a framework that could reward proactive incentive-based non-regulatory conservation. And we did not embark on this journey alone. The Florida Conservation Blueprint was originally conceived as part of the Peninsular Florida Landscape Conservation Cooperative, which you might have heard of in previous years, and it had a steering committee that helped us get off on the right start. Our Florida Conservation Blueprint covers the entire state, but the concept of conservation blueprint does not stop there. The Florida Conservation Blueprint is part of the larger Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy, which serves the region as a whole. Florida is just one piece of that larger puzzle, and our Florida Blueprint is stitched into the Florida Conservation Blueprint that works across the entire region. Okay. This is the entire Southeast Conservation Blueprint, and the vision of the blueprint is to help build connected network of lands and waters that supports thriving fish and wildlife populations and improved quality of life for people. In the long term, the project hopes to witness and facilitate 10% or greater improvement in the health, function, and connectivity of southeastern ecosystems by 2060. In the short term, the project hopes to document and facilitate 1% improvement in the health, function, and connectivity of southeastern blueprints every 4 years, and a 1% increase in conservation actions within the Southeast Conservation Blueprint area every 4 years. Importantly, the project seeks to work across the entire region without limitations based on political or property lines. And based on what I know about CISMA, it seems like this value is very in alignment, as y'all admirably recognize that going out of traditional boundaries is important in conservation. So back to Florida. Now that you have a better idea of where this fits into the big picture, let's dive into our Florida Conservation Blueprint. This is a screenshot of the current version of the Florida Conservation Blueprint. The dark green areas represent the highest priority conservation areas in the state, and the lighter green represents priority 2 conservation areas that we've identified. The project is working to further refine blueprint in future versions, and future versions are going to include a marine blueprint component. The blueprint is based on conservation assets across the state. These conservation assets include coastal uplands, estuarine, freshwater aquatic, freshwater forested wetlands, freshwater non-forested wetlands, hardwood forested uplands, high pine and scrub, marine and pine flatwoods, and dry prairie. Each of these conservation assets hold an important place in the landscape level of conservation in Florida. And some examples of the conservation assets, most of them include several niche habitats. For example, coastal uplands conservation asset includes beach dunes, coastal berms, coastal grasslands, coastal strands, maritime hammocks, beach and surf zones, as well as cactus bearing habitat types in the Keys. The other example on the screen is the conservation asset of pine flatwoods and dry prairie, which includes dry flatwoods, mesic flatwoods, scrubby flatwoods, pine rockland, and dry prairie habitat types. For each of the conservation assets, the blueprint team is working to identify indicators and targets. The conservation targets are measurable expressions of desired conservation asset conditions. More specifically, conservation targets are the quantifiable biological, chemical, physical, or cultural attributes of a landscape that are important or valued to stakeholders identified in the biological planning process. Conservation targets consist of 3 elements. The element must be that they are measurable, which is quantifiable by a characteristic that informs about the landscape conditions. The metric is the most obviously a unit of measurement that we can consistently use across the conservation asset. And finally, the target is a realistic numerical endpoint of that measurable attribute. Indicators associated with conservation assets lead to conservation targets based on shared measures of success. A few ways to include biological planning and conservation design. They can serve as a performance management tool that allows for collective landscape conservation, and they can provide a focus for collaborative monitoring of environmental trends related to the quality and quantity of ecological and cultural resources. We hope that these encourage coordination to identify knowledge gaps and increase our understanding of ecological and cultural resources, And finally, we hope that this method will provide accountability and transparency to partners, constituents, and funders about conservation objectives and the necessary resources and timeframes we hope to achieve them in. In this example that we have on the screen is an example of a conservation target. I'm just using it to illustrate the concept. The conservation asset is the coastal uplands, and it has a potential indicator of altered beach, which is a measurable attribute based in linear miles. And as the target, the goal could be to reduce the amount of altered beach by 25% in 2030. This is just an example. As we search for conservation targets, here's what the team is looking for. The indicator should represent an important attribute of the conservation asset which it belongs to. The measurable attribute should respond to environmental variations caused by either anthropogenic or natural sources. And finally, it should respond to and allow for the evaluation of conservation management and actions. Things that preclude data from contributing effectively to indicators and subsequent targets are the lack of widespread and trackable data. If data doesn't cover the entire conservation asset, or there's not a way for us to patch something together, then the data sources are not as useful in determining conservation targets. With that said, widespread and trackable data is of the greatest importance to us. And as an outsider, CISMA seems to be in a great position to track consistent data on a wide scale throughout the state. Since our project relies on the data and collaboration of other groups, such as yourselves, to produce useful conservation blueprints in the future, this is a great opportunity for our organizations to work together in the future. With that said, we need help from organizations like CISMA to build a widespread network of trackable data sets. You guys work on invasive species, and that's really useful, or could be in the future. Tracking your data with consistent protocols around the state is helpful in more ways than one. When you track your data effectively, it becomes even more useful, not just for your purposes, but also could help to shape future versions of the Florida Conservation Blueprint. Consider staying in touch with us in the future, and maybe we can work together on that. So switching gears, we're going to move into the second part of our presentation today. In this portion, we're going to cover the Conservation Actions Tracker, which is a tool on the Florida Conservation Planning Atlas. So what is the Florida Conservation Planning Atlas? We recognize that reaching our conservation goals will require organizations to work together. And simply put, the Florida Conservation Planning Atlas is a resource for collaborators to work together effectively. The platform is meant to be used as a vehicle for collaboration with the goal of increasing communications between organizations and teams. The platform hosts a variety of tools, including the Conservation Actions Tracker. I want to pass along an important note for any new users of the Florida Conservation Planning Atlas. While you're using the Conservation Actions Tracker or any of the other tools on the Conservation Planning Atlas, I highly recommend using either Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox. The Planning Atlas just doesn't work very well on Internet Explorer. It's not likely that will change in the near future, and although Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox should work fine, Google Chrome seems to deliver a better user experience, and unfortunately the user experience on Internet Explorer is just not very functional. We're attempting to work on it, but for now, please just go ahead and use Google Chrome. The key features of the Florida Conservation Atlas are meant to help you explore data and create maps on your own. We're not going to dive into every single one of these tools. It's a lot to cover, but I just want to give you a quick idea of what's available because we have a robust set of tools available for you to use. One that might be especially useful for this group is the Conservation Actions Tracker, which we're going to explore in greater detail in a minute. The group feature is another tool this group might find useful because it allows stakeholders to work together easily across organizational bounds. It doesn't have firewalls or anything like that to preclude organizations from working together. The other tools include the Climate Adaptation Explorer, the Fire Map Viewer, the Simple Map Viewer, and the Advanced Mapper. You can always contact me for user support, and I can walk you through any of these tools in greater detail. If you're interested in a more comprehensive look, I have a user's guide available, and if you shoot me an email, I'm happy to send that out. So today we're going to focus on the Conservation Actions Tracker. You can find it on the home page of the Florida Conservation Planning Atlas. It's circled in red on the screen. So what is the Conservation Actions Tracker? The goal of the Conservation Actions Tracker is to provide a more comprehensive way to track conservation actions around the state. The hope is to provide a representation of past, current, and impending conservation work around the state. The tool will also include detailed information about each listed conservation action. We chose to develop this tool because we recognize that it's very challenging to stay up to date with the many conservation projects happening around the state. If you take a minute to think about all the conservation organizations and efforts happening around the state, it's easy to see why it's hard to keep track. It's great that there's a lot of valuable conservation work happening around the state, but it's really impossible to stay up with these, even though they each make a valuable contribution to the overall conservation goals in the state. And we wanted to create a place where stakeholders could easily see conservation actions being done around the state to illuminate a broader picture of conservation work impacts. And although it's greatly encouraging to see conservation actions happening all over the state, the Conservation Action Tracker can also serve another purpose. It will allow for organizations to recognize common goals and potentially build partnerships by just seeing what's happening in similar areas with similar habitats and challenges around the state. Working with partners to build conservation actions and projects around the state is ultimately more effective than working separately, and it's a great opportunity to find those potential partners. To access the Conservation Actions Tracker, you don't need to create a database and account if you simply want to view the conservation actions happening around the state, but if you want to add any conservation actions, you'll need to create a database and account. So for most users, it's just more convenient to go ahead and set up a database and account from the get-go. It's extremely simple to set up a database and account. You just have to click on the top right-hand corner of the Conservation Planning Atlas homepage. Next, Adaptation is going to ask for a few basics like your name and an email. After you confirm that you're not a robot, you'll be good to go. You'll also receive an email from Adaptation to confirm your account, and it kind of looks like spam, and it often finds its way into your spam folder, but it's not spam. You'll need to click through it, and that email will allow you to finalize your account setup. And with this account, you'll have access to everything that the Conservation Planning Atlas has to offer. You're welcome to explore all the other features on our Conservation Planning Atlas. And again, if you ever have any questions about those tools, please feel free to reach out. Now that you have complete access to the Conservation Actions Tracker after creating your database and account, it'll be time to start taking advantage of all of its features. These features are there on the slide. We'll walk through each of these features carefully. There's a lot of options, but it's really easy to use, and it's pretty self-explanatory once you start clicking around. If you have any questions about any of these specific features, you're welcome to reach out to me. And if you're able to, you can follow along on your own screen if you pull up the Conservation Actions Tracker. So once you've created your database and account, you can click through to the Conservation Actions Tracker. The icon on the home page will get you to this screen. You'll see this welcome message. You can simply click around this after you read the introduction. Then you'll arrive at the home page of the CAT, and from there you can start using all of the features that the CAT has to offer. You can easily visualize conservation actions by just zooming in or out to encompass your area. As you can see, many conservation actions have already been added since our launch earlier this year. The goal is that conservation actions will continue to be logged around the state to provide a good overview. But if your responsibilities happen to focus on a particular area, then you could zoom in to visualize the efforts in a more focused way. For example, if you just want to see the conservation actions happening within like the Northwest region, you're welcome to just zoom into that area. Or any other small part of the state where it would help you focus your vision to fit into the larger picture of conservation planning in Florida. To explore the conservation actions already in the Conservation Actions Tracker, Just click on any of the blue markers on the map. The cat will automatically zoom into the conservation action area and provide an overview of the action. The information included in the overview is provided directly by the person that submitted the conservation action. Some of the information might be included is a description, a project title, the number of acres involved, a time frame, and the current state of the project. Actions in the CAT might be in progress or already completed, and also there is contact information for the people that submitted the conservation action. You can reach out to these people to set up potential partnerships or just learn more about their project. Please consider adding the best available contact information because other users will be able to reach out and potentially collaborate towards shared goals. And the main goal of the tool is to visualize conservation actions around the state. It's also meant to connect people working on similar projects, so new partners can lead to more collaborative conservation efforts that can help propel statewide conservation forward. If you have an idea of a conservation action that you're interested in, then you can use the search bar to narrow your search. For example, searching for oysters yields a habitat restoration among other things. You could also search for another species like Gulf sturgeon, and currently 4 projects pop up. Or you could search for a lead organization like FWC to see what they're involved in around the state. If you want to narrow your search through a filter, you can sort conservation actions by either the most recent or project title based on your preferences. I found that the most recent filter is especially useful for staying up to date. If your goal is to just see what's happened since the last time you checked into the Conservation Actions Tracker, that's a good filter to use. It allows you to stay up to date with conservation actions happening around the state with minimal effort. And last but not least, you can contribute to the Conservation Actions Tracker by adding a conservation action of your own. When you add your own conservation actions, you're allowing others to view your conservation efforts, and it can be a part of change. To get started, you simply click the Add Conservation Action button at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And the cat will ask you for a variety of information, starting with your project title and location. In order to set up a location, you can either draw a polygon or pick a point on the map to show your conservation action in the most appropriate way. You'll need to provide information in most of the required fields. If a field is optional, it will indicate that. For example, the partner organizations and contact person's organization are optional fields, but filling in the information to the best of your abilities is the best way for people to really learn about your project. And you can use the fields to represent your conservation actions, goals, and outcomes in an easy to understand way. If you have more information that you want to share, but you don't see a field to put that in, you'll have the opportunity to upload supporting documents at the bottom of the form. You can feel free to add anything that you feel is necessary to explain your conservation action to interested parties. Please go ahead and make sure to include a contact person with accurate information so that others with interest in your action can reach out, and you just never know what kind of collaboration opportunities are out there until you put yourself out there. When you have completed your action, click the blue Save button at the bottom of your form, and please make an effort to include the most accurate information possible. Stakeholders from around the state are going to be able to view this information, and in order for this to be a useful tool, it's important to have the most accurate information available to create the best network of conservation action knowledge. Without accurate information about products, stakeholders like yourself will be unable to effectively utilize this tool. Now that you know how to use the Conservation Actions Tracker effectively, let's remember the goals of the tool. The Conservation Actions Tracker is a way for conservation stakeholders around the state to visualize conservation actions and potentially reach out to other stakeholders working on similar projects. Building collaborative conservation efforts between organizations will potentially allow for more effective conservation actions to build upon themselves throughout the state. Please make an effort to contribute to the information in this tool. The tool is really only as good as the information that stakeholders such as yourself provide. It's really up to the users of the tool to create a useful representation of conservation actions in the state. Since the tool's launch earlier this year, many stakeholders have taken the time to add conservation actions to their tool. You can include recently finished projects, current projects, as well as new projects that are in their nascent stages of development that haven't quite hit the boots on the ground portion, because we all know that all of these projects require a lot of planning in advance. It really takes less than 10 minutes for you to add your conservation action to this tracker, so it's really a good use of time. And if you're involved in any conservation efforts through any organization, please consider adding it to the Conservation Actions Tracker. Action could range from restoration to land acquisition, changes in land management, and everything in between. We're really looking for boots on the ground activities with physical results to show for your hard work. And nothing's too small to include, because each action builds towards the larger goal of conserving natural environments in Florida. And I know we've covered a lot of information in a relatively short amount of time, so questions are welcome, and I'm always available to help out. My contact information is on the slide, so you're always welcome to shoot me an email or call. I have a user's guide available for both the Conservation Planning Atlas and a more detailed one for the Conservation Actions Tracker. And if you'd like a copy of either of those, then shoot me an email and I'm happy to provide that. When you ever have questions about the project or the Conservation Actions Tracker, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always available. And if you think this tool will be useful for your team, I'm always happy to come out to your location and give a presentation or set up a webinar on any of the topics. And again, my contact information is on the slide, so please feel free to reach out with any questions that you have when you start to use the Florida Conservation Planning Atlas. So thank you again for allowing me to be here today, and I'm going to hand the session back over to our host, Emily.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. That was really comprehensive and helpful. And so if you guys have any questions, we're going to take questions now. Please note that all lines are muted. So if you have a question, make sure you unmute yourself before chiming in. While you are taking a moment to unmute, if you do have any questions, I'll go ahead and add a little context to how this topic came up. I have actually already had some conversations with Sarah and Emily Drobes and Sherry, the team at FWC that's working on the conservation blueprint and the action trackers on, how this might fit in with efforts that CISMA and FISP overall are working on. And so hopefully through the presentation, you saw a lot of opportunities where this is all about collaboration, which is, what we've been, or what all the CISMAs are also doing. So there's a lot of opportunities here to use the action tracker tool to help kind of track your CISMA activities, or to contribute, or for a larger discussion down the road and in the future about how we can be consistently collecting data to share with the conservation blueprint. So really, we just wanted to get this on you guys' radar, the project overall, and then let you know about this tool that is available to use. So with that, do we have any questions at this time for Sarah? Or we also do have Emily and Cherie on the line as well about the broader project. Okay, so Sherry typed in a question. What types of projects do you want entered into the database? So for example, in CISMAs, would something like mechanical treatment of invasive species projects be something that you would like to have entered?
Yes, I think that would be a good use of the actions tracker, so yes.
So essentially for CISMAs, any kind of, from partner work days to larger species specific projects that they might be working on with partners, to control in certain areas, all things like that you think would be make sense to
Yeah, definitely. That would be a good use of putting into the actions tracker so others can see the results of your efforts.
Okay. any other questions? And yes, I forgot to mention, so you can either unmute and ask the question yourself, or you're welcome to type it into the chat box and we can read it there. Okay, great. So if there aren't any other questions at this time, I just want to thank Sarah again, as well as Emily and Cherie for helping us pull this together and present this to you all. And I think this is something that you know, you'll probably hear more about in the future. And I'm sorry, we got one more question. Okay, so Beth answered that. Can private landowners enter information? And the answer is yes. So my understanding is that anybody can sign up in the Actions Tracker tool, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great.
Anyone can sign up and just include the information you think is best.
Great, thank you. And so I do have one question. So let's say I enter a something into the tool, and it's a project I'm working on with 3 other partners. How are they able to look at and edit that same entry if I add them to the project, or how does that work as far as it being a collaborative tool?
Unfortunately, I don't think that partners added can edit the conservation action, but you can include their information so other people can contact them if they're open to that as you enter tools or enter actions that you've worked on together.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so again, great presentation, great questions. Thank you, everybody. And as I mentioned, you know, this is something we'll probably continue to kind of hit on and possibly remind the team of as we, you know, see where FISP and CISMA may be able to fit in with this project. So thanks again, everyone. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting more questions, which is totally fine. Keep them coming. Is there a minimum project size to be entered? Is this for larger projects only?
There's no minimum project size. I think it does ask for a number of acres, but you can put 1 if it's smaller than that. So there's not really a minimum size.
Okay, so it sounds like the questions are kind of centering around, and I think you did talk about this a little bit, like, but what really do you want to see put in here? So can you just kind of summarize that again really quickly as far as, you know, any and all conservation activities, or maybe what wouldn't necessarily be as relevant?
We're looking for more like boots on the ground activities that you're out in the field and you're kind of restoring something, or removing invasives would be one thing too. We're not really looking for like outreach activities in the actions tracker, even though those are relevant in a different way. It's mostly to get an idea of the physical activities happening in the state on different projects like habitat restoration or other things like that.
Okay, great. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And if you have any further questions, feel free to follow up with Sarah and myself and the team, and we'll help you out. So moving on, just a few updates. I wanted to share kind of what's going on across with CISMA across the state over the next couple months. So lots of activity. The fall is always a really busy time. So coming up this next month, the Florida Keys Invasive Exotic Task Force is having a meeting. The following week, they're also having their annual herbicide workshop, which is full. The First Coast Invasive Working Group will be having a meeting in Fernandina Beach on September 24th. The Sun Coast CISMA has a grass ID class coming up in October that is, I believe, was full the day it was advertised. These classes fill up really quickly. There is a FWC Exotic Pet Amnesty Day scheduled for October 12th in Fort Walton Beach. So this would be in conjunction with Six Rivers CISMA, and we have reached out to them to connect the CISMA with the coordinator of the Pet Amnesty Day. So they're in contact about potentially having a table at the event, and if they need any volunteers, potentially helping with that as well. The Florida Aquatic Plant Management Society Annual Conference is October 15th through 17th. CISMA has a steering committee meeting coming up on October 16th. And then on October 29th, there's another grass sedge identification workshop. And this one is through a collaboration of the Central Florida CISMAs. And I believe, and maybe Sherry, you can just type in the chat, but I believe that one is full as well. But I did see that you can put your name on a wait list. The workshop is going to be held in Apopka. And again, anytime these grass ID classes come up, they fill. So Sherry says it is full and the wait list already has over 50 names. So clearly this is something that's in high demand. So thanks to all the CISMAs who are providing these opportunities. And you know, as we see from pretty much all the CISMA activities coming up are full. So really shows that there's a demand for the work that you guys are doing, which is awesome. Moving along, just a quick note about our next couple calls. Let's see. September, I'm still working with a potential presenter for September, so I will let everyone know as soon as we get that announced. October 23rd will be our last call of 2019. So on this call, we'll do some FISP and CISMA year in review and kind of start talking about what's coming up in 2020. That will include talking about the next National Invasive Species Awareness Week and kind of what we have in the works for that. Okay, so and with that concludes our call today. So again, if you have any questions about the presentation from FWC, please feel free to reach out to that team and see how that tool may help fit in with the work you're doing. Remember, these are the 4th Wednesday of every month, except for November and December. All past calls are available online on our website. So please visit that to see any past calls. And then make sure you're following us on social media. The Florida Invasive Species Partnership is active on Facebook as well as Instagram, and we are starting to tweet. So please go and follow us on Twitter. We're slowly building a presence there. So thank you everybody for joining us today, and look forward to talking to you again in September. Have a great rest of your week.